Hello and welcome to Unacademy IAS English, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. Today I have chosen the international edition of the Hindu because there were some very interesting and important articles. I have chosen a total of 9 articles for our analysis, and there are 4 articles that require a detailed analysis as they are important both for prelims and mains. We also have 5 small articles that could be important for prelims. So let's ensure we comprehensively cover all these topics so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. If you guys are liking our initiatives, do press the like button, do comment below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So just stay with me for the next 60 to 80 minutes and I promise to comprehensively cover all these topics and even provide some additional information with some practice questions. So before we start, please ensure you join our official Telegram channel. The link is provided in the description because after the session ends, we conduct a quiz on these topics that will help you revise these articles as well. So now let's begin with the discussion by looking at the first article. We have a column on page number 6 written by Arushi Malik that talks about the plight of refugees, particularly women refugees around the world. So I feel this topic is very pertinent given the conflicts, the crisis situations that are raging around the world. Right now the world is dealing with a major refugee crisis. According to data, there are more than 11 crore people displaced as a result of wars, conflicts and human rights situations. Out of them, more than 3 crore people are refugees. So this brings up the question, who exactly is a refugee? A refugee is someone who has fled from their home country, seeking asylum in another country because there is a threat to their life back in their home country. Due to a civil war, maybe due to a planned ethnic cleansing or genocide attempt, or due to wars, or the human right violations which are occurring. Because of these situations, there could be a direct threat to the life or to the lives of people and their family members. So when people flee their home country because of this direct threat to their life, where they are being targeted, they could be targeted on the lines of their religion, their ethnicity, or in general they could be the civilian victims of a war or a conflict. So those who run away from a country seeking asylum in another country in order to protect their lives, to protect their families, they are called refugees. So around the world, we have multiple conflict situations going on. In our own neighborhood, we have a situation in Myanmar where the country has been going through a civil war over the last 4 years. As a result, a lot of refugees have been displaced and a number of refugees have entered India, the northeastern states like Manipur and Mizoram. In the past as well, India has a history of dealing with refugee situations across the region. Then if you look at the Gaza war, again the disproportionate use of force by Israel has triggered a major refugee crisis and the Palestinians have nowhere else to go as they are trapped in an open air prison which is the Gaza Strip. The Russia-Ukraine conflict, even in Ukraine, given the ongoing conflict, there has been a massive refugee crisis, and ever since the war began, lakhs of Ukrainians have fled to other European countries as refugees seeking shelter, seeking asylum. Across Africa, there are many countries where civil wars are raging. So all these incidents, they contribute to the ever increasing refugee population, and these situations, they lead to the displacement of people. It completely uproots their lives, raising very serious humanitarian concerns. So in this context, the writer is talking about the UN High Commissioner for Refugees and presenting some important data, and the article is focused on women refugees in particular regarding the gender-based violence and discrimination that women refugees face. So I feel these are very important topics which are being covered, which can be relevant both for prelims and mains. So before we look at the analysis, I would like to first talk about the UNHCR, give you some basic facts which can be important for a prelims question. The UNHCR, or UN High Commissioner for Refugees, is a UN organization that has been established to focus on refugee protection, to work for the welfare of refugees, to work for the protection of refugees. It was established in the year 1950 by the UN General Assembly, and it is headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland. It was established in the aftermath of the Second World War, as Europe was dealing with a massive refugee problem following the Second World War. In 1951, the Refugee Convention was also adopted, which was Europe-centric to protect the European refugees in the aftermath of the Second World War. So UNHCR would become the primary executive organ that could implement the provisions of 1951 Refugee Convention. It functions as per the mandate of the 1951 Refugee Convention and the 1967 additional protocol to it. This defines the work and the mandate of UNHCR. It has a presence in more than 135 countries. It has done some incredible work in the field of refugee protection and human rights, and its contribution has been even recognized with 2 Nobel Peace Prizes. It got a Nobel Peace Prize in 1954 and as well as in 1980s as well. So in India as well, there is a UNHCR office in New Delhi, and it plays a big role in registering the refugees, in looking after their safety and welfare, and works with the host governments to ensure that refugee rights are protected. Now coming back to the article, the writer is mainly pointing out the disproportionate impact on women refugees and how women refugees are largely discriminated. When it comes to a refugee population, generally women are seen as the face of the refugees. Even if you Google refugees, you will generally see images of women and children. And this is no coincidence, because a large proportion of refugees tend to be women, and women with children, usually with infants and young children, and they often face a lot of discrimination. They face gender-based exclusion, which makes it all the more challenging for women refugees. See, refugees are already facing a dire situation. First of all, they have abandoned their home country. There was a threat to their life. They have been part of a conflict, so they would have seen horrors which is beyond our imagination. They would have seen deaths of their close family members, their own children, their partners, their parents. They themselves might be injured. They themselves might even have become disabled because of the impact of war. They might have lost a limb, or they might be seriously injured, leading to even disabilities amongst refugees. So refugees suffer from severe trauma and mental distress. Studies have very clearly established that PTSD, anxiety and mental stress is very common amongst most of the refugees, particularly women refugees. Given the suffering they have gone through, they will suffer from long-term post-traumatic stress disorder, which affects their mental well-being, and generally women don't get a priority or preferential treatment given the patriarchal nature of societies. Now if you look at India, if you specifically look at India, India has a rich history of accepting refugees, be it the Tibetan refugees in 1959 following the Tibetan uprising, which was crushed by China brutally, that triggered an exodus of refugees into India led by the Dalai Lama, the Buddhist religious figurehead of the Tibetan Buddhists. The then Nehru government accommodated the Tibetan refugees, and today they are well settled in India. In Dharamshala, in Kushalnagar, in Karnataka, we have settled the Tibetan refugees. Then we witnessed a dire situation in East Pakistan in 1971, when the Pakistani army committed brutal atrocities, almost a genocide, against the Bengali community. So we received nearly 10 million Bengali refugees, and India played a pivotal role in protecting the Bengali population. The same with Sri Lanka, where Tamil minorities were targeted by the Sinhala Buddhists. This triggered an exodus of Tamil refugees into India, particularly in 1980s, and India protected and sheltered the Tamil refugees. So like this, we have taken in refugees from various conflict zones, even from Afghanistan, from Myanmar, the Rohingya refugees, when a genocide was committed against them by Myanmar's military regime and the radical Buddhists. So India has a rich history of dealing with refugees. It has established its credentials as well when it comes to protecting the refugee population. But however, if you look at the data, if you look at the numbers, there are more than 2 lakh diverse refugee groups in India, and around 46,000 refugees have registered with UNHCR in New Delhi. So out of the refugee population in India, majority of them, a large chunk, close to 46%, they are comprised of women and girls. So if you take the children into account, right, infant boys and the young boys of these women, this vulnerable population of refugees easily crosses 50%. So the focus of the writer is this vulnerable population. Women as the face of displacement, women as the face of refugees, because they face a disproportionate impact and they are a vulnerable group which is more exposed to various threats and risks and hazards. So in this context, it's important to understand the challenges faced by women refugees in particular. Given the patriarchal nature of most societies, women are in general burdened with gender-based roles where they are expected to take care of the young and the old as well. And this becomes an added burden on refugees, especially women refugees, because in the family there could be people who have been injured in the conflict, who have lost certain abilities, they might be physically disabled. So taking care of the entire family becomes a burden on the women of the household. So this generally doesn't burden the men within the refugee families, but it becomes a disproportionate burden on women. Apart from that, women face enhanced risk from gender-based discrimination with regard to entitlement of refugee rights, and even the risk of abuse, including sexual abuse. Especially in war zones and conflict zones, sexual abuse, molestation and rape, they are often used as weapons of war. So women would have already suffered these horrors in the conflict zone, and even after becoming refugees and seeking asylum in another country, given that they are more vulnerable, they face a very big risk of sexual abuse. There is a risk of them being pushed into trafficking, into prostitution as well, which severely affects the well-being of women. This further adds to the stress that women are already suffering from. So this is where the writer sheds light on the kind of abuse that women refugees often face and the discrimination that they come across even in the host countries. In host countries as well, the patriarchal nature of societies doesn't ensure that there is equal treatment for women refugees. So this is the key point being raised by the writer, and it's a very important analysis and an examination according to me. So the writer says that in India, where we have a patriarchal male-dominated society, the society is such that in general there is a lesser priority given to women refugees when it comes to their overall welfare and well-being. When it comes to accessing their rights as refugees, be it securing access to food, be it securing access to shelter or securing access to basic health care, men get a preference. Within the refugee families, the men take priority, again given the gender-based discrimination that exists, and women refugees often get left out. This in turn affects the young children as well, because women are playing the role of a caregiver, and any impact on the overall well-being of women will directly affect the children that they are bringing up. So this is where the writer talks about the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. India is a signatory to this convention. We are a party to it. We have adopted these principles, and we have even enacted a law, the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act in 2016. So under the UN Convention, it is clearly mentioned that women who are disabled should also get equal treatment. All the freedoms and rights guaranteed to those who are suffering from disabilities should be made equally available irrespective of religion, race, gender, caste, etc. It prohibits any kind of discrimination, which means that women if they are suffering from disabilities, they should receive the same care and treatment, they should enjoy the same rights and freedoms as enjoyed by the other gender. So India also has inculcated these principles. Our law that deals with rights of persons with disabilities, it does recognize mental illness. It gives priority for women when it comes to securing the basic rights which should be accorded to those suffering from disabilities. So India does inculcate these provisions, but generally when it comes to implementation, there is a big gap which leads to a disproportionate impact on women refugees. Now some of you might be wondering, aren't refugees a burden on the country? Why should a country like India care about refugees? Please understand that protecting refugees and securing basic rights to them is a humanitarian obligation. Is this clear? As a responsible global power, India has always played this role in most cases where we have proactively protected refugees and secured basic rights to them. And also don't forget, there is a constitutional duty as well under Article 21 that guarantees right to life. Even the Supreme Court has reiterated this point several times, that right to life is not just available to citizens, it's available to non-citizens as well. So the state has an obligation to ensure that right to life is guaranteed to refugees as well, which is a fundamental right under our constitution, correct? Which means securing right to health, ensuring that they have access to all basic essentials from food to medicines to even work opportunities and livelihood opportunities. So given this legal framework and constitutional framework that exists, it's very important to fill those gaps and ensure that we deliver on these commitments. Now if you look at India, India is not a signatory to the Refugee Convention and the additional protocol. Let me explain why. It's a very important point. India has not signed the 1951 Refugee Convention and we have not signed the 1967 additional protocol as well. The reason is, when 1951 Refugee Convention was adopted, it was Europe-centric. It was primarily designed to meet the needs of European refugees in the aftermath of the Second World War. So India didn't want to take up any unnecessary international obligations, that too from a convention which was designed for a specific region. It was designed specifically to deal with European refugees initially. India was mindful, it was aware of the context present in our neighborhood in South Asia. South Asia was always a volatile region. Right after independence, we had suffered the horrors of partition, which had triggered an exodus of refugees from West and East Pakistan into India. So signing a refugee convention would essentially mean that India would have taken up unnecessary international obligations, that too when we are situated in a difficult neighborhood like South Asia. There would be many such situations that would develop in our neighboring countries, and each time India would be burdened essentially by those international commitments. That's why India wanted to retain the flexibility that we would decide on a case-to-case basis whether to accept refugees or not, whether to provide basic welfare to refugees or not, instead of taking up such international obligations. Of course, later the Refugee Convention was expanded. It's no longer Europe-centric. Through the 1967 additional protocol, Refugee Convention was expanded and it secures basic rights to refugees. It also places certain obligations and duties on those refugees. It also mandates the signatories to remain committed to their duties with regard to protecting refugees and securing their welfare. So states have an obligation, which have signed the Refugee Convention in the additional protocol, to ensure they accept the refugees and ensure that they not just protect their life, but even provide basic services from food to health, education, livelihood opportunities, etc. And also states have an obligation to abide by the principle of non-refoulement. The principle of non-refoulement states that a country which has accepted refugees cannot forcefully send them back to a place where they might be targeted. Like for example, India can't forcefully send back Afghan refugees back to Afghanistan where they might be targeted by the Taliban. So if India were to do that, it would be a breach of principle of non-refoulement. Now you might argue that India has not even signed Refugee Convention and additional protocol. So how can India breach principle of non-refoulement? Principle of non-refoulement is seen as part of customary international law. So whether you have signed Refugee Convention or not, whether you are party to additional protocol or not, if you are a UN member, if you have taken the commitments of UN Charter, if you have signed the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, then ensuring that you uphold principle of non-refoulement becomes part of international customary law, which means a country which has received refugees, it can't forcefully send back those refugees to the same place where they might be targeted, where they might face violence. So India has carefully chosen not to sign the Refugee Convention and the additional protocol even after it was expanded, even after it was no longer Eurocentric, because India wants to keep the option open to decide on a case-to-case basis, and we know that our region, our neighborhood is very volatile, where many such humanitarian situations will keep propping up. So we don't want to be burdened by this. We don't want to take up any unnecessary international commitments. Even without this, India has a rich history of accepting refugees and taking care of refugees. So the focus going forward should be on how can we protect women refugees better? How can we ensure that women refugees who suffer from disabilities, who are affected by mental distress, who suffer from PTSD, how can they be better protected in countries like India? That should be the focus. So the writer is urging India to look at this as part of sustainable development agenda, as part of the SDG goals, and it is high time for India to have a law and a policy to deal with refugees as well. It's unfortunate that even though India has received so many refugees in the past, till date we still haven't brought out a law to create a legal framework. We don't have a policy to guide the government when it comes to a refugee crisis. So this is something that's lacking in India. So the writer is also recommending that there should be relevant policies, programs, there should be a legal framework as well, so that there is consistency in the approach of the government when it comes to dealing with refugees. So this is what we take away from this very important article. Given the global scale of refugee crisis and migration crisis, I feel the topic is very important, not just for GS paper 2, but you can even expect an essay topic on this. So let's look at a practice question based on this. Refugee women, especially those with disabilities, are guaranteed certain rights but are seldom able to realize them given the multitude of barriers they face. So it's an open-ended statement which has been given, and a directive has been added where you are asked to critically examine this statement. So this question is specific to refugee women and the challenges that they face, especially those with disabilities. So you have to keep your answer very specific. Instead of talking broadly about all refugees, be very specific and discuss refugee women, those suffering from disabilities. That should be the focus of your answer. In the introduction, maybe you can set the context. You can clearly mention that the world is dealing with multiple refugee situations given the scale of conflicts and wars which are raging around the world. Maybe you can add in some data, throw in some data from UNHCR to represent the scale of the crisis that the world is dealing with. Just 2-3 lines, one small paragraph to set the context, and in the body you can point out that women are the face of displacement. Women represent a substantial section, a substantial percentage of refugees. You can throw in some more data from India, for example, point out that nearly 46% of registered refugees in India are women. So if you take into account their children as well, right, including infant boys whom they will be taking care of, the vulnerable population amongst refugees, the size increases. So you should clearly identify that women refugees and their children, they fall into a vulnerable category. Why they are vulnerable? Because one, there is gender-based stereotyping, gender-based discrimination. They are at greater risk of suffering abuse and exploitation, including the risk of being pushed into human trafficking, the risk of being sexually abused as well, and they already suffer from severe mental distress. Studies have shown that PTSD and anxiety is very common amongst refugees and more so amongst women refugees. So as much as possible, substantiate the argument with such evidence. You can even refer to a recent study in Sudan. Sudan, which is going through a civil war, a study was conducted amongst refugees, and especially amongst women refugees, 72% of them, they reported suffering from mental illness, from PTSD to anxiety to distress. So point out that there are commitments under the UN Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities to ensure that equal treatment is given to all people without any discrimination. Mention that India is party to it. We have a law, the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, which guarantees equal rights to those with disabilities without any discrimination. So given this legal and international commitment, it is important to ensure that women refugees, those who are disabled, are given equal care and access to all the rights and freedoms guaranteed through the law that is present in India. So that should be your concluding point, and maybe you can throw in a suggestion, a way forward, and suggest that India should also have a law. We have a rich history of accepting refugees, but we don't have a legal framework. There's no policy to guide the government. So you can suggest that this will bring more clarity, more consistency in the approach of the government. So that will be a well-rounded answer. It completes, it essentially does justice to the question that has been given. Now let's look at the next article. On the same page, we have a column related to the census exercise. I hope you know that the government of India has not carried out a census for several years. India has the practice of conducting a decennial census, a census every decade. And the last census that was carried out was the 2011 census. The next census was supposed to be conducted in 2021, but this has been delayed for more than 3 years now. So the writers are exploring the relevance of a census, why census is important, why the data is so crucial. They are also clearing certain wrong perceptions that people have about census. Generally, when I say the term census, I'm sure most of you will be thinking of population data. Right? This is a misnomer. Census has often been equated with just population related data. But it's not just that. Census is much beyond that. A census captures a wide variety of data that gives a great insight into our demography. It captures vital demographic information, and even socio-economic patterns and trends are captured, which is very crucial for policy makers and lawmakers. Census data is absolutely essential for lawmaking, policy making, for implementing welfare programs, for designing such welfare schemes, for making budgetary allocations. Because in a census, we not just estimate the population of the country, that's not the only parameter which is captured. There are many other key indicators that are brought out through a census. Lot of locational data is brought out, specific to a location, specific to states, cities, rural areas. Location specific data is captured regarding the overall family distribution, the income levels, the occupation, literacy levels, the gender ratio. So key indicators of demography is captured. It gives you great insight about the structure of families in India. It gives us insight into individual details as well that can help us establish trends and patterns in the economy. It can help us understand the deficiencies in governance, because census captures vital data regarding the type of house that you live in, whether you have a kacha house, a pakka house, do you own vehicles, right? Do you have access to a mobile phone and internet? So all such details are captured, which gives us an entire picture about our economy, our society, our demography. So please come out of this wrong perception that census is just about the population number. That census is not just about the population of the country. It's not just about that statistical number. It's much beyond that. It helps us establish those trends and patterns, gives us a lot of insight into locational data, family-based data, individual data that can really help lawmakers and policy makers to come out with better laws and policies, to design better welfare programs, to achieve better targeting of welfare initiatives so that we can ensure socio-economic development. So such a critical exercise has been delayed in India for more than 3 years, and the government has not even provided the correct excuse for that. Initially, the government said that the pandemic had caused a big disruption, and as a result, the government is not in a position to conduct a census because it's a nationwide exercise. It is a very intensive exercise that requires lakhs of enumerators to go door to door and collect this data, collate the data and make assessments based on that data. So it's a very intensive exercise. But the government said, since the government machinery is preoccupied with the pandemic in 2020, the government said that we are not able to conduct the census. Maybe then this excuse was acceptable, but what's the excuse 3 years later? That's the question the writers are asking. If the government, the election commission can conduct elections, the general elections, the world's largest electoral exercise, then what is stopping the government from conducting the census exercise? So this inordinate delay, it will definitely have a huge impact on policy making and with regard to welfare schemes and budgetary allocations as well. One concern is that the government of late has started relying on other surveys for such data instead of the census. For example, you have the National Family Health Survey, Periodic Labour Force Survey. These surveys also capture some important data. The NFHS captures health related data at the family level. The PLFS captures data in the employment market, in the labour market. But these data which is brought out, such data which is brought out through these niche surveys, they are very sector specific to the labour market, specific to the healthcare sector. This data can never paint a broad picture about the economy, the conditions in our society. For that you need a comprehensive decennial census which has been conducted since British times, since the British era. Is that clear? So the writers are insisting that the government should quickly conduct a decennial census and use this as a basis for decision making and policy making. Unfortunately, most of our politicians, our political parties are obsessed with a caste census as of now. Given its electoral implications, especially on the reservation policy, caste census has become the obsession of political parties, even though there is a valid argument for such a caste census. But this obsession just about the caste census has essentially taken away the attention from a decennial census. So the writers are saying that carry out the debate whether caste census is required or not. If required, go ahead and do the caste census as well, so that benefits of reservation can be better targeted at the most underprivileged backward communities. But at the same time, ensure that adequate attention is given to a decennial census, because that is the only exercise which can give us the insight regarding the demography of our population, regarding the human geography of India, that gives us insight about the economy, the society, the overall welfare which is taking place. So a caste census or NFHS or PLFS, they can't replace a decennial census. That is the core argument of this article, and based on this you can anticipate a question, because the government has faced a lot of criticism regarding the delay in conducting the census. So please take up this practice question. The census is not limited to offer a population count. In the light of the statement, examine the impact of the delay in India's decennial census. So I will leave this question to you. It's a 10-mark question. I expect you to write a concise answer which is well structured with a logical flow of thought, and please try to paste the answer in the comment section so it can help other students as well. Let's look at another important column on page number 9 related to cyber security. This article talks about the changing trends of cyber crimes in India. I am sure all of you would have noticed the sudden exponential increase that has happened in the attempts to carry out cyber crimes and cyber frauds. I'm sure there is not a single student who is watching this session who has not received fraudulent calls or phishing mails or these fraudulent messages on WhatsApp, on Telegram and various platforms, right, which are essentially trying to dupe you, to trick you, to reveal some sensitive information or forcing you to commit some action which will make you the victim of a cybercrime. So cybercrimes have definitely gone up exponentially and they represent a major security risk. So now the recent trend which is being observed is that generally cyber criminals would target urban areas, urban population. They would target those who are well aware of using mobile phones, those who have access to internet, essentially the educated crowd and those living in cities. They would be the primary target of cyber criminals. But of late the disturbing trend is that cyber criminals have moved beyond the cities. They are focusing on rural areas as the rural population is more vulnerable to fall prey to these scams. There are several cyber criminal mafias which operate in India and abroad. For example, in India, there are few cyber crime hubs in Jharkhand, in Madhya Pradesh, in Rajasthan. I'm sure many of you would have even seen a web series like Jamtara on Netflix, for example. Or you would be aware of a recent gang which was busted in Rajasthan, where an entire section of youth in few villages, they were colluding together to carry out such cyber crimes, targeting innocent people to dupe them, to steal their data and even to steal their wealth, to basically to loot from their bank accounts. So these groups, which would initially target just the urban crowd, those who were having sufficient bank balance, right, but now they have shifted their focus because they have realized that the urban population has become more aware. Most of the urban crowd is better aware regarding these scams and frauds, so they don't fall victim to it. So even if you get a phishing mail, right, you are aware, you quickly identify that it's a scam, you don't open the mail, you don't even open that email. Or let's say you got a fraudulent call saying that your package has been detained by the customs, drugs were detected in a package that was meant for you, right. Such fraudulent calls are very common, where digital arrest is used to blackmail the victim and extract money from the victim, right. So these frauds have become very common. There are other scams where you are asked to invest in these very lucrative investment schemes or in cryptocurrencies, and eventually you will be tricked and duped of your money. There are these job based schemes, job based frauds, right, especially targeting the college crowd and the jobless youth. So this section has already been in a way saturated. They have been exposed to enough cyber crimes. The urban crowd, the crowd which is more educated, the crowd which has some bank balance, they already know that such scams and frauds are happening. There is greater awareness in general, which makes them secure relatively when it comes to cyber crimes. This has made it harder for the cyber criminals as well to dupe people. So now they are focusing on the rural areas. In the rural areas, people who have just got access to a mobile phone or an internet, who are not so well educated or who are illiterate, right. And also today, don't forget, digital communication is not just happening through English. Previously, English language was the primary medium of digital communication, which meant that mobile and internet was largely restricted to the educated crowd and the urban crowd. Now this is changing with the development of detailed vocabularies in other languages. Today mobile devices and apps, they cater to every language, right, which increases the reach of mobile phones and internet, reaching to the rural population and even to the not so well educated population. But this population, which is more new to these technologies, they are more vulnerable as they aren't aware of these scams and frauds, and they won't be able to distinguish such fraudulent attacks or phishing attempts, and they might easily fall prey to them. So the article is talking about many such incidents in Telangana, in Rajasthan, in other parts of India, where people in rural areas have been easily tricked to reveal their OTP and essentially their bank accounts have been emptied by the criminals, or they have easily tricked them to click on certain links which will download a malware, and the attacker will gain control of the device and they will steal the sensitive data, maybe the bank information or personal data, which they can use to hack into their accounts and then steal the money which is stored in their bank accounts. So such scams and frauds have become a major concern, and this is where the concerned authorities need to wake up. If you look at India, we have CERT In, Computer Emergency Response Team India, which is the nodal agency to deal with cyber crimes and to protect India's cyberspace from all types of cyber attacks. It has a legal mandate under the Information Technology Act to protect the Indian cyberspace. It functions under the Ministry of Electronics and IT. There are other institutions as well. You have the Ministry of Home Affairs, the Nodal Ministry for Internal Security and Cyber Crimes. Investigating cyber crimes and prosecuting cyber criminals becomes a mandate of the Home Ministry. The concerned state governments and the state police and their respective cyber divisions, they have a major responsibility to ensure that such criminal rings are broken up and more awareness is spread amongst the community. CERT In is actually involved in such exercises. CERT In not only looks out for the threats which are emerging, but it also engages the media and the public to spread awareness about the new age cyber crimes which are happening, the new malwares which are coming up. So there is a need to communicate the risk and the threat to the rural population as well, to the hinterlands, especially to the illiterate population who are new to mobile phones and internet, and they may not be aware of such scams and frauds or how exactly they carry out these scams and frauds. So if they are aware of the modus operandi, if they can identify and detect such attempts, they would become more cautious. They would not reveal any sensitive information or data which will protect their personal data and their cyber safety as well. So these are the immediate measures which are necessary: promotion of awareness by engaging with media, the concerned steps by the concerned authorities from the central government to the state government, especially the security agencies, the police forces, right, that deal with cyber security. They have a critical responsibility to tackle these threats and ensure that the cyber crimes which are raging, they are arrested. Now coming to the next article, on page number 3, we have an update regarding the recent changes that have been done with regard to reservation, with regard to SC/STs. If you remember, a few days ago, we discussed a topic in detail following a landmark Supreme Court verdict by a constitutional bench. We had discussed how the Supreme Court has empowered the states to carry out sub-categorization, that is to identify the most backward communities within SCs and STs and accordingly give preferential treatment in the policy of affirmative action. Under the quota system, where seats are reserved for jobs and education, states have now been allowed by the Supreme Court to carry out sub-categorization based on empirical data. If states can bring out reliable data to point out which are the most backward communities within the SC/ST category, based on that, sub-categorization can be done in order to ensure that the most backward classes receive the benefits of reservation while excluding the others who have already benefited from the policy of reservation. Following this landmark ruling, there was a concern amongst SC/ST community leaders whether the concept of creamy layer will be introduced for SC/ST reservation. If you remember the discussion that we had few days ago, we had discussed what is the creamy layer concept. So now can you tell me in which historic ruling of the Supreme Court was the creamy layer concept introduced? Right now, creamy layer concept is used only in OBC reservation, where there is a eligibility criteria. Essentially, the top elites within the OBC community, they are excluded from enjoying the benefits of reservation. For example, children of Group A officers, children of those who hold constitutional posts, families with a certain income, with certain land holding, they are excluded. They are part of the creamy layer, which means they are already socially uplifted. So within OBC reservation, there is the concept of creamy layer, where the creamy layer is excluded from enjoying the benefits of reservation, right? So this was introduced by the Supreme Court in a historic verdict So please let me know which case is that. In which case did the Supreme Court introduce the concept of creamy layer for OBC reservation? As of now, OBC reservation alone has creamy layer concept. If you look at SC/ST reservation, there is no concept of creamy layer. Creamy layer concept has not been introduced here. But after the Supreme Court's verdict regarding subcategorization, a concern came up whether the Supreme Court has ordered the introduction of creamy layer for SCs and STs. Because in this constitutional bench, there were 7 judges and around 4 judges recommended the introduction of creamy layer. 4 judges, they opined that creamy layer concept should be introduced in SC/ST reservation as well. But however, this is not part of the final judgment. Please understand that. In the majority judgment, which was delivered in a ratio of 6:1, majority of the judges, they did not include creamy layer introduction as a part of their ruling. So it's not part of the Supreme Court ruling. It's only a recommendation from some of the judges who are part of the constitution bench. So to examine this issue and to assure the SC/ST communities, the Union Cabinet met. It has engaged with all the stakeholders and it has assured that creamy layer is not being introduced for SC/ST reservation. Is that clear? The government has made it clear that the Indian Constitution, as envisioned by Bhimrao Ambedkar and our constitution makers, it did not envision the concept of a creamy layer of excluding certain communities within SC/ST category. So the government has reassured all the stakeholders, all the community leaders that as of now, creamy layer will not be introduced within SC/ST reservation. States can carry out subcategorization based on empirical data to prove that there are few extremely backward communities within SC/ST category. So they can be given preferential treatment, that is subcategorization. But there is no provision of excluding the top layer, the creamy layer, which has already enjoyed the benefits of reservation. So this has been made very clear by the government that creamy layer concept is not applicable for SC/ST reservation. So with this, we complete all the major articles which required a detailed analysis. Now let's quickly head towards the prelim section. We have 5 articles and let's take a look at them. On page number 1, there's an article related to border security. Given the crisis happening in Bangladesh, the Ministry of Home Affairs has constituted a 5-member committee. It has set up a 5-member committee under the chairmanship of a senior official of BSF, the Border Security Force, which is the border guarding force of India along the borders with Bangladesh. See, India has a policy called One Border, One Force policy. It was implemented after the Kargil war based on recommendations of the Kargil Review Committee. In order to streamline border management, one security force was assigned the responsibility of an entire border. So accordingly, BSF manages the entire border with Bangladesh. It also manages the entire border with Pakistan. Previously, multiple security forces would be deployed on the same border, leading to lack of coordination, confusion and overlap of jurisdiction. So when one border, one force policy was introduced, right? So one central armed police force would be assigned the mandate to protect and guard and secure one specific border. Like ITBP guards the borders with China. SSB guards the borders with Nepal and Bhutan. The entire border with Nepal, Bhutan is guarded just by one force, the SSB. Assam Rifles for Myanmar. Similarly, BSF for the entire border with Pakistan and with Bangladesh. Now please note that we share the longest land boundary with Bangladesh. It's 4,096 kilometers long. Amongst all the neighboring states, the longest land boundary of India is with Bangladesh, 4,096 kilometers. So given the latest crisis, the political violence and the regime change that has happened, there are many risk factors for India which has emerged. One major concern India has right now is the well-being and safety of Indians who are stuck in Bangladesh. We did evacuate several thousands of Indians, especially Indian students, right, who study in Bangladesh. They were evacuated. But we still have a lot of Indian workers and other Indians who are present in Bangladesh, trapped in Bangladesh. So their safety and well-being has become a concern for the Indian government. Concerns have come up regarding the welfare and well-being of the minorities in Bangladesh, especially the Bengali Hindu minorities. There have been few disturbing reports of radical forces like Jamaat-e-Islami and others targeting Hindu families and places of Hindu worship, and serious concerns have come up about the overall safety of the religious minorities. Even the minority Christians and the Ahmadiyas, which is a sect within Islam, right? So under the under the pressure of these radical forces, the fundamentalist forces in Bangladesh, minorities have always faced such targeted attacks and persecution. So to look into all these concerns, the MHA has constituted this committee under the chairmanship of Ravi Gandhi, who is the Additional Director General of the Eastern Division, the Eastern Range. And the committee also includes Aditya Mishra, the chairperson of Land Ports Authority of India, which manages the land ports of India along the land borders of India. Because along the borders we are facing an increased concern. A lot of Bangladeshis have tried to enter India. We have always faced the problem of illegal migration from Bangladesh. And following the latest crisis, hundreds of Bangladeshis have lined up at the border, at these land border crossing points, at the checkposts, and they are demanding permission to cross over into India, right? So right now they are all held up, as you can see in the image, by the border guarding forces, and thankfully India has very good relations with the border guarding force on the other side. BSF has very good ties with the BGB, the border guards of Bangladesh. Under Sheikh Hasina's regime, we had very good security relations between our security forces. So there is very good communication between BSF and BGB, and both have taken sufficient measures to prevent any spillover into India, especially the crossover of illegal migrants into India who may not have the right valid documents. So to address all these concerns, the committee has been set up, and a preliminary inquiry by the MHA has shown that as of now there has not been any large scale targeting of the Hindu community in Bangladesh. There have been few incidents here and there, sporadic incidents, where Hindu families and minority communities have been targeted, but it's not a general trend. India has clearly pointed this out. The Home Ministry itself, based on its preliminary inquiry, has concluded that there have been no major targeted organized attacks against religious minorities like Bengali Hindus. There have been few incidents which India has taken note of, and that's why we are urging the interim government under Muhammad Yunis to take all the necessary measures to protect the Indians and the minority communities. And also please note that BSF generally does not use lethal measures along the border. It has abandoned the use of lethal measures here since the illegal migration went down in the last 10-15 years. BSF only uses non-lethal measures. It uses only non-lethal weapons. It opens fire only when it is really necessary. But otherwise it has developed non-lethal measures to control any illegal entry into India. So in coordination with the Bangladeshi border guards, BSF is working very actively to secure this boundary given the security situation that has developed in Bangladesh. Is that clear? So these are some important points that you need to note down. Next, on page number 3, there's a very important government scheme that has been mentioned. Union Cabinet has approved around 8 important railway projects, but what is important for us is this government scheme, the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Urban Component 2.0. The second edition of Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Urban Component was recently announced in the union budget as well, with a specific allocation made to it, and now the government is rolling out this ambitious initiative to provide for affordable housing in urban areas for the economically weaker sections in urban areas. So to benefit the economically weaker sections, low income groups and middle income groups in our cities, this ambitious scheme has been rolled out. It's a flagship program of the Modi government. It's an upgraded version of the Indira Awas Yojana which was present before. So under the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, we have 2 components, a rural component focused on rural housing and an urban component focused on affordable urban housing. The government has set aside an investment of 10 lakh crores with a government subsidy of 2.3 lakh crores in order to benefit 1 crore beneficiaries who constitute the urban poor and the middle class families in our urban areas. As you know, in most cities and towns, accommodation has become very expensive. Rents are sky high, property rates are sky high. This leaves out economically weaker sections, low income groups and even middle income groups. They find it very difficult to afford a decent house in a city or a town. To solve the problem of housing in our cities, this ambitious scheme was launched, and already more than 1 crore beneficiaries have benefited, with 85 lakh houses already constructed and delivered to the beneficiaries. So now the government is rolling out the next edition, the 2.0 version of the scheme, and the goal is to reach 3 crore rural and urban households collectively under the rural and urban component of Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana. So please note down the eligibility criteria for this ambitious scheme. If you look at the urban component, there is a clear eligibility criteria listed out. One basic criteria is that the family, the beneficiary family, should establish that they do not own any pakka house anywhere in the country. Is that clear? They should not be owners of any pakka house in the country, and they should fall under the income bracket to be categorized as EWS, economically weaker section, or low income group or middle income group. And all the statutory towns as notified based on population data from census 2011, all those towns and cities will be covered under Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana urban component. Next, on page number 5, we have an important update regarding the treatment of tuberculosis. Tuberculosis has become a very big challenge, a healthcare challenge, due to the emergence of multi-drug resistant and extensive drug resistant variants. You would have heard about MDR-TB and XDR-TB. Due to the abuse of antibiotics, due to the abuse of the first line of drugs we have to treat TB, drug resistance has been developed amongst patients, and even the pathogen itself, right, the bacteria that causes the disease also has evolved to develop resistance against the first line of drugs that we have. This renders the basic treatment for tuberculosis ineffective, and it increases the treatment regime. The duration goes up significantly, because when patients are suffering from MDR, multi-drug resistant TB, or XDR, extensively drug resistant TB, not just your first line of drugs, even your second line of drugs become ineffective. Most antibiotics will not be able to treat the infection. So as a result, patients have to be put on these very intensive drugs covering around 14 different drugs, and the treatment lasts around 18 to 24 months, 1.5 to 2 years to fight the condition. Now there is a big relief for patients suffering from multi-drug resistance and extensive drug resistance. A new treatment regime has been introduced, and Government of India, the Ministry of Health, is rolling this out. It is called BPAL, BPAL, BPAL. It refers to 3 new drugs which are proven to be much more effective against multi-drug resistance TB and extensively drug resistant TB. B stands for bedaquiline, PA stands for pretomanid, and L stands for linezolid. These 3 drugs will be administered as part of the new treatment regime, and it is considered to be a very effective treatment, and it can resolve the condition within 6 months. The treatment duration will come down from 18 to 24 months to just 6 months. And this treatment regime is also cheaper. Since only 3 drugs are involved instead of the 14 drugs before, it will be relatively cheaper. The drugs are available. It will be rolled out across the country. So this is the new TB treatment regime for treating multi-drug resistance and extensively drug resistant TB. Next, on page 12, we have an update regarding the crisis in Myanmar. We have been tracking this development from several months. We have understood how the military regime in Myanmar is under severe pressure following the gains made by the ethnic armed groups and the rebel factions. Several ethnic armed groups who have formed their alliances, they have delivered a significant defeat to the military regime, and they have captured critical locations in Myanmar. For example, we have studied about the 3 Brotherhood Alliance in previous classes. How 3 armed groups, the Arakan Army, the MNDAA, TNLA, these are ethnic armed outfits of Myanmar. They have formed this alliance, and they have delivered a significant hit to Myanmar's military. They have captured key towns, military bases, even airports and roads, and ethnic armed groups are now gaining a dominant upper hand. Similarly, there are other alliances as well, which includes the People Defence Forces, the National Unity Government, the Kachin Independence Army, and other ethnic armed factions. Even they have registered a significant success. Now, this is creating a situation where Myanmar is almost on the brink of collapse. Experts are predicting that maybe in the next few weeks or months, Myanmar might witness a collapse where the military might lose control over large parts of the country. If not a complete collapse, at least they are expecting the country could get fragmented, where the military will control only few parts of the country, with the rest of the country falling into the hands of these ethnic armed groups. Now, while India is closely watching these developments, China has already taken one step ahead. It has directly engaged with Myanmar's army and it has worked out a plan to stabilize the country. See, China doesn't really care about stabilizing Myanmar. China's interest is economic and strategic. China cares about its investments. China has made massive investments as part of China-Myanmar Economic Corridor under the Belt and Road Initiative. It has built a strategic port, the Kyokfu port in Rakhine State. It has built oil pipelines where it is extracting oil from the Bay of Bengal, transporting it to the Yunnan province. China has built key highways and railway lines and power plants as part of China-Myanmar Economic Corridor. So China wouldn't like to see its investments being threatened by the large-scale violence, the civil war which has been raging, especially in the Shan state, which is present in northern Myanmar near the Chinese border with the Yunnan province. In the Shan state, the armed groups have captured key locations, and recently we even discussed the capture of the military command at Lashio. If you guys are attending the sessions regularly, you will remember this point. I had shown you the map as well. I had shown you where this military command of Lashio is located. It's near the border with China in the northern province of Shan. So China is worried and concerned about these developments as the impact of this war will spill over into China. China has already received refugees as well, just like India has received refugees. But there is speculation that China is not only working with the military regime, it also works with the ethnic armed groups. Since many decades, China has good contacts and relations with some of the ethnic insurgent outfits. China allegedly sponsors some of these armed groups covertly in order to gain influence in Myanmar so that it can have a leverage on the military as well. So there are reports from Myanmar's military that some foreign forces are supplying advanced weaponry to these armed groups. That is why they are seeing such success. The armed rebel groups have gotten access to even drones and short-range missiles and advanced weaponry, which otherwise would not have been available to them. So there is speculation, maybe within Myanmar's military and amongst experts, that China is essentially playing both the sides. On one hand, working closely with the military regime, trying to protect its core interests, while parallelly working with the armed groups as well, preparing for any eventuality. Tomorrow, if the military regime is thrown out, if there is a regime change like it happened in Bangladesh, then China will still be in a good position as it will always have leverage with the ethnic armed groups because of the alleged support, the covert support it has already given to them. So according to this article, the Chinese envoy has met with the chief of the military junta and worked out a plan, a 5-step plan, a roadmap to stabilize the country and to protect Chinese economic and strategic interests. So that is what we take away from here. This is again a developing story. We'll keep tracking this because whatever happens in Myanmar has direct implications for India. Coming to the last topic, Khan Yunis, which has been frequently in the news. So I feel that this can be important for a map-based question. There can be a map-based geography question asked in UPSC Prelims. According to the article, Israel has unleashed a major attack at Khan Yunis, which is an important neighborhood in Gaza Strip. So in this map, you can see the Gaza Strip, and this is where the Khan Yunis neighborhood is located. It was a very densely populated neighborhood, and ever since the Gaza war began several months ago, Israel has pounded Khan Yunis and central Gaza, and most of the population here has been evacuated. Most of the Palestinians here have been forced to abandon their homes, and they have all amassed at the Rafah crossing with Egypt, facing Egypt. So Khan Yunis has been the center of some deadly attacks by Israel. Israel has used massive force, from airstrikes to heavy weaponry has been used to target Hamas. And in this conflict between Israel and Hamas, the civilians in Palestine have paid a heavy price, especially in Khan Yunis. So here several schools and hospitals also have been targeted by Israel by alleging that terrorists were using them as a cover. But Israel is accused of targeting even civilians, even children, and it stands accused of committing human rights violations and crimes against humanity. So Khan Yunis has been frequently in the news. It's one of the most bombed region in Gaza during the conflict, and you should know where it is located. So on this note, I bring my discussion to an end. If you want any regular updates with regard to current affairs from me, please join my Telegram channel. The link is also there in the description, and you can scan the QR code, and I'll try to share as many updates as possible through this Telegram channel. So that is it for today. I hope you guys have liked the session, understood everything. Do let me know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to press that like button. That is it for now. We'll catch you tomorrow. Thanks for watching.